it's my turn to tell you my story. I grew up in a small town in northeastern Arizona. When I was 8, my mom, older sister, and I moved into an old adobe house in one of the older neighborhoods. From what we were told, the house was over 100 years old. It was a large 3-bedroom house with large rooms and long, narrow hallways. I hated it. From the moment we moved in, I absolutely hated it. My mom's room was on the front of the house, just off of the dining room. There was a covered porch, the living room with a large picture window. The dining room also had a large picture window. The kitchen faced on the side of the house, then a back porch. The hallway off of the kitchen led to the bathroom in my sister's room. Then there was a random hallway leading to nowhere in the middle of the house. It was just there. Parallel to that was the hallway where my room was, which joined the hall where the bathroom was. Confused yet? Sorry, just giving you some background. In the winter, my mom's room was roasting hot, even when the rest of the house was cold, but in the summertime, her room was freezing cold. She had to have tons of blankets on her bed while we were sleeping with just sheets. It started with my mom. In the middle of the night, she and my older sister came and woke me up and took me into the living room. There was a large arched doorway that separated the living room from the dining room. We were huddled on the couch, and my mom said that she was lying in bed and her room was freezing. Then she heard a sound in the attic, like a brick being dragged across the floor up there. What happened next was that it moved down into the wall. Remember, this is a solid adobe structure, and then under the house. That was followed quickly by the sound of rushing water in the attic, in the wall, under the house. Then the curtains started moving. The windows were shut by the way. She freaked and woke my sister up, who was 16 at the time. My sister went in there, and then she heard it too, and then the lights went out. From then on, my mom would not sleep in her room. She slept in the hide-a-bed, in the living room. We called my uncle to come over and check things out. Nothing in the attic. Empty. Nothing under the house. This aunt and uncle had lived in the house several years before, and my aunt told my mom that she used to hear babies crying in the night, and it wasn't even her kids that were crying. They were sound asleep. Well then, all kinds of weird stuff started happening. I'd be in my room, and my mom would be in the kitchen. I'd hear her call me and tell me to come into the kitchen quick. I'd go running, and she'd tell me that she never called me. Every night, for a year, when we sat down to dinner in the dining room, someone would knock on the front door. Every single night. At first we'd go and check, but no one would be there. Then, we sat down, and they'd knock again. Finally, we just gave up, and they'd stay there and knock on the door while we ate dinner. We often heard doors shut, where there were no doors, catch glimpses of someone passing down the hall and into my sister's bedroom. I hated being there alone after school, so I'd sit on the front porch by the front door until my mom came home. Oftentimes, we'd catch someone peeking in our windows from outside, only to run to the window or outside and find no one there. At night when I tried to sleep, I'd hear someone pacing down the hall. Every night, up and down the hall, in front of my bedroom, pacing. Appliances would turn back on after my mom would turn them on. Voices whispering all the time, crashing noises, banging noises, all kinds of stuff. One day, I came home from school and could hear someone breathing. Things got worse and more intense as time wore on. One day, I wrecked my bike and screwed my leg up pretty bad. That night I slept in the hide-a-bed in the living room with my mom. She got up at 5:30 to take a shower and get ready for work. I turned the TV on. I saw something out of the corner of my eye in the dining room, so I turned to look. There was a very tall man standing in the arched doorway leading to the dining room, just standing there. All I saw was from the chest down. He was wearing a red t-shirt and jeans, just standing there. I didn't see a head or anything. Of course, I absolutely flipped out, screaming, and he disappeared. That was the last straw. We moved out. It was empty for years after that. After about 8 years, Someone else moved in, and they lived there for about 7 years. I wonder if they hear things too, or if they just got accustomed to it. I still dream about the house at least once or twice a month. Very weird. Thanks. My name is Lisa Wilson, and I'm 15 years old, and live in a house that is only 14 years old. I've always believed in ghosts. There have been times when I might have seen one, lots of times, but I can't be sure. These are 2 of those times. The first time was about 2 years ago, in the summertime. My friend and I were walking through the small field across from my house, and when we looked back towards the park beside my house, a little brown-haired girl with jeans and a pink sweater ran out of the bushes towards us. For some reason, we were so scared, and so we ran. When we got to the rows out of the field and looked back, she wasn't anywhere. That was on a Friday. The very next Friday, at around the same time, we were walking through another field. This one had a little path with really long grass all around. All of a sudden, my friend screamed and ran. I thought she saw a snake, so I ran too. After we got out of the field, we stopped running, and I asked her what it was. She said that it was the little girl. She was sitting on top of the long grass, which of course couldn't happen because the grass would have sunk down. The next Friday, we went out hoping to see her again, and maybe this time talk to her, but she didn't show up, and we haven't seen her since. The second time was in my house, about 1.5 years ago. I was sleeping, and I know I was dreaming about something scary, because when I woke up, I felt startled. All of a sudden, there was a huge flash of blue light, and 2 people, a man and a woman, banged against my wall. They were holding on to each other like a hug, and hit my wall sideways, and made a huge bang. I thought I must have dreamt it, so I just got up and got a glass of water. The next morning, my brother told me that he heard me. I thought he meant when I was getting the water, but when I asked, he said no, that huge bang. I couldn't have hit the wall myself because it would have hurt a lot, so I couldn't have been dreaming. I hope that these were real ghost experiences, because I've always been extremely interested in them, but if not, then I don't know what they could be. I just thought I'd share that, and I hope you enjoyed reading it. My name is John, and this happened when I was 10 or 11 years old, so it would be around 1978 or 79. While I was younger, I was involved with the church, and this happened one Sunday morning while I was setting up for Mass. I was the only one in the building setting up when I heard a loud bang coming from the choir loft at the other end of the building. Curious, I stepped out from where I was and called out hello, and there was no answer, so I figured that the person just didn't hear me and was just doing what they needed to do in getting ready. I was looking up the chair loft to see if I could see the person, and there was no one there, and figured that someone had just fallen down, and the noise just echoed throughout the church. I was just going through the normal, rational ideas to come up with a reason for what I had just heard. Right then and there, I had a feeling that I wasn't alone. Normally, I wouldn't have minded, because I figured that the organist came in early to get ready, but this was different. I had this uneasy feeling that not only was my life in jeopardy, but my soul was. It was a fear that I never felt before, or since. As I was looking up at the chair loft, I couldn't see anyone yet. I could sense that there was something up there. It then appeared to me. It was a shapeless and formless figure, and it was exuding, or giving off this evil that just penetrated through me like sound would at a concert if you were standing too close to the amps. What I felt went way beyond the fight or flight reaction people talk about when faced with a situation like this. I was frozen there, beyond being scared, and my mind didn't process things for a few seconds. Then all of a sudden, I guess my mind snapped back to reality, and I just ran and took off out of the church and stayed there. I then saw the priest come out of the rectory and started going over to the church. I didn't realize how far I ran until I started walking back to the church. I'd ran about 100 to 150 feet from the church when the priest had finally seen me fully dressed to take part in the mass and seen how freaked out I was. He asked me what had happened, so I'd told him what happened and what I'd seen and felt. He tried to reassure me that it was probably my imagination, that it was an old church, and that it might have been just something falling or something mechanical. The thing is, I've been in that building long enough to know the sounds of the mechanical devices when they kick on and off. Another thing that I know is that my imagination wouldn't give me that life-threatening feeling of being able to tell me that there was something giving off such evil that reverberated throughout my body. I've always been a skeptical person, even since I was this age, and not only that, I've never let my mind get the better of me. I've never lost my faith in God and His advisory, and I feel that's what this one was. Some kind of evil spirit or demon, and since that day, whenever I went into that church, I always made sure that there would be someone else there so that I wouldn't have to come across that thing again. Then again, this wouldn't be the first time I've come across something like this. But then again, that's a story for another time. It's because of this situation that I became curious about the paranormal, and yet I still try to rationalize everything. When dealing with a situation like this, I believe that saying if you rule out the probable, all that remains, however improbable, must be possible. I still feel funny talking about this because the only people that seem to believe me are the children around here. We moved to this 120-year-old farmhouse about 4 years ago. When we first moved here, my youngest son was 3. He would ride his tricycle back and forth from the living room to the kitchen, which at the end was the basement door. I was doing the dishes when he turned to me and asked me to stop laughing at him. I told him I didn't say anything, so he proceeded to go back to the living room and back again. When he reached the basement door, he turned to me and said, "Can you hear them, Mommy? They're laughing at me." I left it alone, but I never forgot it. As time went on, little things would happen that really got my attention, like the smell of perspiration when nobody was around. It would only last a minute or two, and would only be in one spot of the room. I would go to other parts of the room, but could smell nothing until I went back to the original spot, and it would still be there. I would also smell it, as if it were just passing by in front of me, and then be gone. This continued for the next year, and then one day, I laid down with my son for a nap. It was about 1 in the afternoon. I would wait until he fell asleep, and then I would get up, but before I could move, our bed started shaking for no reason. It only lasted a couple of minutes. After that, things happened a lot. My 8-year-old started to get smacked on the leg when he was asleep. He would always come downstairs afraid after it would happen. I started getting nudged in my leg at night, like someone was trying to wake me up. I'm a very light sleeper, so I would wake up immediately and look all around my bed and my room, but nobody was there. One night, when I was sleeping, I felt something lay across my legs. I tried to move, but it was so heavy, so I started to kick real hard and crazy, and it went away. Again, nothing was there. My son was 5 when he asked me if I could see the man's work boots standing in my dining room. He would see black things floating by and asked if I saw them. He would describe them like shadows. But the clincher was when we were all sleeping at 4 a.m. in the morning and my dresser started shaking so hard I thought I was going to fall over. I spoke to my pastor's wife about it, and she said they say a prayer every night and then ask the Lord to protect them from any harm or evil. I started to do that with my children as well, and we added it to our prayers, but we also added spirits also, and we've never had another problem since. Occasionally, I do still smell him from time to time, and I do still hear footsteps across the ceiling when nobody is upstairs, but that's no problem. I don't mind. Thanks for giving me a place to tell my story and not feel like I'm crazy. My friend's sister-in-law has had a lot of weird experiences in her house, and so have other people who have been there. I'm not going to go into detail about them, but I'm just going to list a few before she got her second dog, Harvey. The first one she had always used to run into the computer room in the middle of the night and just stand there barking. and when she got her other dog Max, he also did the same, but instead, it was in the kitchen. My friend's mom was helping clean up one day when he heard someone scream in her ear. When she went downstairs, her nephew was the only one there, and he hadn't heard anything. Also, my friend's sister-in-law saw the shadow of the man out of the corner of her eye, and sometimes the kettle turns itself on and off. One time, I slept there for 2 nights, and I never noticed anything. I was even walking around the house in the pitch black dark to find the dog, and I still never noticed anything. Recently, she put the house up for sale because of everything that went on. My friend and her sister-in-law were going into town that morning. First, there was a man coming to value the house, so we went and sat there for 15 minutes. The man was just talking to her about the house when he heard this sort of dragging sound, and it sounded like the kettle boiling also, but we didn't say anything, just looked at each other and waited to see if the man would notice, but he either didn't or didn't want to say anything. When the man had left, we were just heading out the door, and we looked into the kitchen to see that the kettle had been dragged right forward to the edge of the counter. Whether it had boiled or not, I don't know. I work at the Days Inn by the airport in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I am almost positive we have a ghost occupying one of our rooms. I was taking a picture of the hotel for a website and brochure and had downloaded the images to the computer behind the front desk. The hotel facade had a few flaws, cracks here and there, so I thought I'd mask them with a Photoshop type program. To get a better idea where the flaws were, I made a negative copy of the picture to see what needed to be fixed. I zoomed in on a small crack in the stucco on the second floor, one room over from the lobby area. I zoomed back out to see how large this was, and happened to look at the glass in the window of room 207. There appeared to be an elderly gentleman looking out at me. I showed this picture to a few coworkers, and most of them agreed that there was someone looking at me. Unfortunately, now, housekeeping won't even clean that room if for some reason it gets rented. I have a few pictures from inside that room that I'll be sending as soon as I can remember where I put the discs. One pic is taken from directly outside the door and has an orb. The next is inside the room and has what I can only describe as a floating worm light. I suspect Henry, well, he's got to have a name, just likes it up there because it's peaceful. Few guests have complained about chills or a bumping noise, but nothing more than that. Still, it would be really nice to find out for certain just what is going on up there. What I find funny is that I've had one of my friends and coworkers go up there with me just so I could take the pictures. I'm a 6'2", 240-pound male, and she's 6 foot and weighs about 115. What kind of chicken am I? Oh well, better to be safe than sorry. If any pro ghost hunters happen to be in the area and want to check it out, drop me a line. I'll give you a good rate. I just remembered something that happened to one of the girls that works here though. Shortly after I showed her the pictures at 207, she went up there by herself, looked around, and then sat on the bed. The smoke detector was directly above her and fell, giving her a small lump and a big scare. I guess he doesn't like her too much. One other thing. Just this morning, I heard some tapping upstairs. There's no one on the second floor right now. I only have 5 people in the house, and they are all at the end of the hallway on the first floor. Maybe Henry doesn't like getting publicity. My house is haunted by something, someone. It's never really bothered me. It's nothing big. Doors opening, radio turning on and off by itself, footsteps, floorboards quake, noises in the attic. But as I said, it never really bothered me until about 4 months ago. I always wake up in the middle of the night, but one night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a tight feeling in my chest. It wasn't so much tight as it was heavy, like a weight or something, but it wasn't all that. After a while, I couldn't get back to sleep, so I tried to put on my TV, only to find I couldn't move. When I tried to sit up from a glass of water, the weight on my chest got heavier. It was like someone was sitting on me, like a child, not moving, just a weight. I tried to arch my back, and the weight got heavier, and I couldn't breathe. I really started to panic and sweat. I was extremely scared at this point. I started to cry a little because I didn't know what to do. Then, all of a sudden, I felt a slight pinching on my right elbow, and that's all I can remember. I woke up the next morning feeling fine, just as I did the day before, although I had a red mark where I felt the pinch. I don't understand why on earth the ghost in my house will be sitting on me. Nothing has occurred since the normal phenomena, and an extra thing has started now. In the bathroom, we have a pulley light switch and a hanging mobile, and when you're in the shower, the light switch will start to swing, followed by the mobile, when there is no breeze whatsoever. I know it sounds stupid, but I swear it really happened. Thank you for your time. My life has been relatively free of paranormal occurrences, although one morning, at age 8, I experienced the much dreaded sleep paralysis. There is, however, one other story worth mentioning. In 1991, I was a 20-year-old Army corporal stationed in Germany. By this time, I was a graduate of French commando school and was in charge of my own cavalry recon squad, a jeep with 2 other guys. One chilly winter night, my unit was deployed somewhere in southwestern Germany in the wilderness during field exercises. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. Me and my crew spent half the night slinking through the woods, doing the usual cavalry-style patrols. At around 2 a.m., we were told to stop the jeep and set up a listening post in a clump of trees. I decided to be the first watch of the night, while the other 2 guys got some sleep. After about 30 minutes of staring into black nothingness, I decided to get up and walk around a bit. With a weapon in hand and a radio on my back, I began to prowl around the area. Yes, it was unbelievably dark, but at least this was keeping me occupied. Suddenly, a very average night turned into an encounter I will never forget. After several minutes of walking, I suddenly realized how quiet the night was. Not a sound to be heard from an animal or even an insect. Thinking this was a bit strange, I walked a few more paces before realizing I was right in the middle of a very old deserted village. I pulled out my night vision goggles and noticed that the village consisted of about 7 or 8 old stone houses. Only the walls remained, as the old thatched roofs were long gone. Suddenly, I felt this dark, evil presence, like a weight on my shoulders. I knew I was being watched by someone or something, and I knew that I was not welcome in this place. I slowly turned around and began walking back the way I came, with every footstep in the tall, dry grass sounding like a firecracker. It was very slow and painful walking out of this place. I consider myself a rational person, but was truly scared as I made the long walk back to the jeep. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night inside the jeep. As you read the stories on the site, it may be hard to appreciate the feelings others have felt as they try to tell their tales. I promise you, the fear and sixth sense we have felt during these tales are the most important part of the story. Hi, my name's Brooke. I work at an assisted living facility in Pennsylvania. I worked the 11/7 shift, so of course, there are a lot of stories about the place already. But besides that, I was wondering if the experiences I've had, as insignificant as they may seem or be, could be the activities of ghosts, or just my mind. Of course, I'm not the only one that claims to have seen things, but who knows? For instance, I'll just be walking around the building, and I constantly think that I see things, like out of the corner of my eye. It's not a definite thing, it's just a shape. It's either black or white. A lady I work with always sees black when she sees things out of the corner of her eye. As for me, I always see white. The forms are white, that is. Is there a reason she sees black and I see white? And today, for instance, I was walking and I was sure there was someone behind me. when I semi-turned around, out of the corner of my eye, I swore there was a figure for a split second, but it was gone. It scared me to death, actually. That is why I'm writing to you today, because today, that was the closest a form or figure has ever been. No one has ever died in this facility that I work in, but they have died in the hospital. The building has only been open for 4 years, maybe 5. I was just wondering if these could be ghosts, or just my eyes playing tricks on me. A lot of the residents say that they see a woman in white in their room, or sitting on their bed. I don't know how to explain or take that either, but I appreciate your reading. Thanks for listening as well. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me directly and has forever changed my view on the supernatural. I would like to state for the record that I've always been a skeptical person who never believed in anything that couldn't be proven. Before my experience, I didn't believe in ghosts and had never given the topic a second thought. Since that period of time, it has always been on my mind frequently. This is my story. The event in question occurred several years ago at my grandparents' house. I was 19. I'd been out with my friends and returned home around 2 a.m. I retired to my bedroom on the second floor of the house and got into bed. I'd been lying there for 2 or 3 minutes, reflecting on the events of the evening, when suddenly I heard the muffling screaming of a woman coming from the basement. Almost immediately, the screaming began to slowly ascend the stairs, and within a minute had reached the first floor. It continued to ascend the stairs, and 30 seconds later had reached the second floor and was right outside of my room. The screaming was very loud and was clearly that of a woman. My bedroom door was closed, and I could therefore see nothing. The screaming continued outside of my room for approximately 1 minute, and then slowly began to descend the stairs into the basement. When it reached the basement, the screaming ceased, and the house was silent. That is the end of my story. I feel that in order for me to give an objective account of this occurrence, it is important that I detail my own actions and opinions. When I first heard the noise, I recognized that it was coming from the basement, and although it sounded like a woman screaming, I immediately disregarded this as being ridiculous. I started to try and rationalize what I was hearing. However, my analysis ended rather abruptly when I realized that the noise was getting closer. By the time I reached the first floor, it had become quite loud, and being unable to think of any rational explanation for such a noise, I became convinced that the ghost of a woman was ascending the stairs of my grandparents' house. I became completely terrified and quickly sat up in bed, both so that I could hear better and so that I could run, if necessary. When it reached the second floor and was outside my room, every hair in my body was standing on end, and my hands were literally shaking with fear. I was too scared to move, and for that reason, remained stationary until it returned to the basement and the noise subsided. I stayed where I was for several minutes, waiting for the noise to return. When it didn't, I got up, turned on my light, and sat back down on my bed. Being wide awake and in no mood to sleep, I spent the next couple of hours lying in my bed, listening and thinking about what had happened. Eventually I fell asleep, and the next morning, when I woke up, my light was still on, and I was completely convinced that I had heard a ghost. I spent the entire day gathering information and trying to figure out what I had heard. The only other people in the house were my grandparents. My grandmother is a sound sleeper, and my grandfather is hard of hearing. They heard nothing. They bought the house in 1966 and sold it in 2000. During that time, they never heard anything that even remotely resembles what I described. My mother lived in the house for several years in her late teens and never heard anything either. I myself lived in the house on and off for years and never heard anything before, and have not heard anything since. I consider that maybe the pipes or something else in the house made the noise, although I don't think any pipe on earth could have made the noise I heard. I dismiss this theory anyways, because if the house did make odd noises, someone would have heard them in the past 30 years. I also dismiss the wind, because I've spent many windy nights in the house and heard absolutely nothing. In the end, I came to the conclusion that there was no earthly explanation for what I heard, and that what I experienced must have been supernatural. It sounds crazy saying that, but I know what I heard. I will never forget it. I'm sure it was a ghost. In conclusion, I would just like to state that all of my friends think I was asleep and that the whole thing was a dream. I would like to touch on this briefly. The first thing I would like to say is that I know I was not asleep. Here's my case. I've been in bed for 2 or 3 minutes, less than 5 for sure, and was laying on my back thinking. I've always had a difficult time falling asleep. It usually takes me 20 to 30 minutes, and I've never been able to sleep on my back. At the time, I was making no attempt to sleep, but was lying there, thinking. Secondly, no matter how real a dream seems, you always wake up afterwards, and that's how I know you were dreaming. I don't think it's possible to remember a dream without waking up and realize you are dreaming. If it is, it's never happened to me. If it had been a dream, I would have woken up and said, wow, that one was weird. That never happened. I was awake. Thirdly, I turned the light on after the occurrence, and it was still on when I woke up in the morning. I know for a fact that I was awake. That is my story, and I swear to you that every word of it is the truth. I don't know if you will believe me. No one else will, but I swear it's the truth. I am 17 years old. In the past 7 years, I'd lived in 3 different houses, and every one of them had a ghost. The first one we lived in was from 94 to 96. The occurrence that spooked me there happened in my parents' room. A week before anything weird happened, a bunch of knickknacks fell off of my mother's headboard. So, she put it back and pushed it away from the edge. On Easter morning of 95, I was with my brother, sister, and dad, watching TV in the living room. About 20 feet away from my parents' bedroom door, I heard a bang, and my mom came running out of her room. She really wanted to know who was pounding. Apparently, when I heard the bang, all the stuff had fallen off her headboard and kind of flew off this time. Not only that, but this Oreo tin can she had looked like it had been stepped on. After that, our next door neighbor told us that she had seen this old man that lived here before us in the backyard on the day he died in the hospital. Now, the living room looked into a hallway. In the hallway, you could see into my brother's room, and my parents was right next door. The living room had a clear view of my parents' room. One night, my dad fell asleep in the living room. He was sleeping, facing the hallway. He suddenly woke up and looked into his room. He saw this cloud of smoke billowing in the hallway, moving towards his room. He jumped up and yelled fire. When he yelled, my brother woke up and saw this. The cloud settled in the hallway and disappeared. I know this was not any kind of imagination because my brother and my dad are very logical and analytical people, and they both witnessed this. In the next house, it was never anything really. The only occurrence that happened was the night one of our cats died. The cat house was in the corner of my room, and I had a nightlight next to the cat house. I looked up to the top cat house, and I saw the shadow of our dead cat. The cat loved sleeping on the top every night, and this night was no exception. The third house is the house we have lived in for the past 3 years. I believe it all started with the woman. My dad wakes up early in the morning to get ready for work. When this happened, my mom would occasionally fall asleep in the living room. There's a door next to the entryway that leads into the back hallway where all the rooms are. The first room is my brother's, the second is my parents', then you turn, and then comes my sister's room, and lastly, mine. Now, on this morning, my dad woke me up and looked over. He saw the back of a woman and assumed it was my mom. He got up and went out into the living room and saw my mom sleeping on the couch. He went back to his room and no one was there. After that, I had an experience with a man. It was about 4 in the morning and I was suddenly woken up by the feeling of a large man tapping my foot. I looked up and no one was there. I have this ticker stuffed animal that I got for my birthday from my sister. At the time of my next story, my large dog slept in my room with me. He would sleep up against the door, so I couldn't sleepwalk and open it without waking up. I woke up one morning and my ticker was nowhere, so I figured it rolled under the bed. I opened my door and it was laying outside of my door. About a year ago, my mom started sleeping out in the living room for health reasons. The wall our couch leans against is connected to my brother's room. We had a family friend staying in there. while my brother was in boot camp. One morning, my mom woke up about 7 a.m. She heard a knocking on the wall between the living room and my brother's room. She thought it was just our friend when it moved to the wall behind her computer about 10 feet away. This is an inside wall, and there's no way there could be any knocking. It then moved to the ceiling. She said it sounded like someone knocking. A couple nights later, I heard her banging in my parents' room. Their bathroom is across the hall from my brother's room. My bathroom is across from my sister's room, and the bathtub stalls are back to back. When I heard the banging, it sounded like it was coming from the wall where the shower head is, and they have a lot of shelves over there, so it would be impossible to bang as clearly as I heard. A couple of hours later, I heard shuffling footsteps in the hall coming from the bathroom. On 2 occasions, my dad has seen a streaking white figure that appears to be a cat, but we are not positive. We have also seen shadow people walking in the side yard through our shutters. Not long ago, our next door neighbor told us that the houses in our neighborhood was built on Indian burial ground. We are not sure if this has anything to do with all this. The house we live in now appears to be the most haunted so far. I'm 17 years old, and I used to live in an old house made in 1921 in Haverhill, Massachusetts that I know is haunted. One day, when I was 10, I was in my upstairs bedroom with my 2 sisters coloring. I think that's when it started. We were home alone when we heard the closet at the end of the stairs slide open. Then we heard it slide back. The sliding doors of the closet always made a loud rumbling noise when it was open. When we heard it that day, we didn't get scared at first because we thought my mom had gotten home from work, so we ran downstairs to greet her to find that nobody was home. We looked around and then looked outside to see if the car was in the driveway, but we were alone, or so we thought. We ran back upstairs to our room and grabbed shoes and hangers for the so-called protection. Then all of a sudden, we heard footsteps racing up the stairs, then back down. We never saw anything actually reach the top of the stairs, but they ran up and down repeatedly, about 10 times, then it stopped. We were so scared, we just sat there crying, waiting to hear more, but nothing else happened. Then, when I was 15, I was taking care of a dog, and when I brought it to the foot of the stairs, he froze and just stared at the top. I didn't think much about it, so I picked him up and brought him up the stairs to my room and closed the door. The dog then began crying, and he seemed to be getting nervous and uneasy, and he started scratching at the door. When I opened the door to let him out, he ran down the steps so fast that by the time I got out the door, he was gone. After that, many more things started to happen. I woke one morning to hear something or someone dragging themselves on the rug next to my bed. I was so frozen with fear that I didn't even look to see what it was. The cabinets in our kitchen would open and slam shut by themselves. I could also hear the silverware jiggling and slamming inside the drawers. There are even moments where the computer keyboard would also type by itself. I've also had my foot slapped and have felt something sit on me while I was laying in my bed. There are also too many noises and weird things to explain, and also creepy dreams. So I'm glad to be out of that house. Well, I would like to know if the house has some kind of history or if anybody died there. Last year, after we moved out of the house, our cousins were sleeping over and we were talking about our old house. One of my cousins, who slept over our house a lot, asked why our dad always walked up to our room and why he did it over and over without ever coming into our room. We told him about the day we heard the racing footsteps running up the stairs, and she got so freaked out. My other cousin also said she hated sleeping in our room because she always heard those same footsteps coming up the stairs but never making it to the top before it ran back down again. Now in our present house in Orlando, Florida, weird things have suddenly begun to happen. Noises, shadowy figures, and also short wide figures have appeared. I always seem to see something in the corner of my eye. When I turn my head to look, there is nothing there, and my sister felt somebody whistle and blow in her ear. Well, that's all I have for you for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for reading. Hello, my name is Nikki, and I'm 14 years old. Unfortunately, I don't remember the details to my story very well, because it happened when I was about 4 or 5 years old. But anyway, my family lived in a large house that was actually quite old. One night, I was asleep in my bedroom upstairs, and I awoke in the middle of the night. I went straight across the hall to my brother's room and asked him to come downstairs with me because I was scared and wanted to sleep with Mom and Dad. He asked me why I was so scared, and I said I didn't know. So he came down with me. We started down the stairs, and I froze at the sight of what I saw. There was a little boy at the end of the stairs. Now, this could have been my younger brother, but my brother was just a few months old. This little boy had brown hair and was just sitting at the bottom of the stairs. I wasn't scared, so we kept walking. We got into my parents' room, and I was getting ready to climb in their bed, and all the lights in the house came on at once. My dad woke up and checked the circuit breaker, but nothing was wrong, so he went through the house and shut off all the lights. Well, the next night, I saw the same little boy, and the same thing happened again. This activity continued for a few more days, and my parents checked out some information by the guy that lived there before. He said a little boy around the age of 5 died because he was very sick. He died in the middle of the night in his sleep, and a few hours before he went to sleep, he turned all the lights in the house on because he was afraid of the dark. I have never seen anything since, even though I've moved several times. I always somehow sense when there is an unknown presence around them, but I'll always remember that night. I've since been afraid of the dark, though I hate to admit it, but it's not like anyone is going to criticize me for it. Honestly, never, ever in my life, ever thought I'd be writing to you. My name is Jackie, and I am 19 years old. I live in Saskatchewan, Canada. I found out about your website on the radio. I was listening on Halloween, and they said that this was the coolest website to go on. I started reading the stories in my spare time. Right now, I'm about halfway done the second page. I haven't been reading much for about 2 weeks. Well, anyway, here goes my story, and I speak nothing but the truth. Last night, I was hanging out with my friend at her house, and my boyfriend called and said Grandma was feeling very sick, and that my dad and Mom wanted me to spend the night there in case anything happened. So I called my grandma, and she told me that she was going to bed, and that I didn't need to rush over. She said she would leave the door unlocked, and I could come in at any time. I got to her place about 12 a.m., and I stayed up until 1:30 a.m. Then I went to bed in the room across the hall from her. It helped me that I could hear her breathing, because then I knew she was okay. I woke up in the morning, and my arm was numb because I had been lying on it. I woke up and started to shake it out. I opened my eyes and looked up. The blind was almost shut, but I could see out the last 2 inches that it was getting bright out. Then I got a weird feeling because I couldn't hear my grandma at all. I also couldn't hear her up. I was just thinking I should roll over and look towards the door and the clock and see what time it was and get up and check on her. Just as I was about to roll over, and by this time I was very awake, a cat jumped up on my bed. I did not see it. I was facing the window with my blankets over my head. It jumped up just behind my knees. My grandma does not have a cat. I knew right away that it was Slippers, or as my grandma likes to say, good old Slips. Slippers died about 15 years ago. Well, anyway, she jumped up on the bed and walked up to my shoulder and laid down on my upper arm. I totally felt that. I was thinking, no way, this is not happening to me. I was totally paralyzed. I couldn't open up my eyes or even wiggle my fingers. Then there was a very loud, sort of rushing noise in my ears. It was like a cross between a blank TV station and the furnace times 100. I was not paralyzed with fear because up until now, I wasn't scared. Then when I couldn't move, I felt totally terrified. I thought maybe something had happened to my grandma in the night, and this was a way of saying goodbye or something. Then I totally forgot about the cat, and I thought that I really wanted to get up and check on my grandma, but the cat and the noise were still there, and I still couldn't move. When I couldn't move, I was thinking about your website, and I totally understood how terrified people can be when this happens. I was just trying to think if there could be a rational explanation for why I couldn't move. I know that I was not so scared that I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. Then the noise went away, and the cat was suddenly gone, and I could move again. I quickly curled up in a ball and laid there for a few minutes until I was sure that whatever it was gone. I did not want to see a shadowy figure in the room. Then I quickly flew out of bed and into the hall. By this time, I heard a radio was on, so I knew that my grandma was up. I was standing in the hall, and I realized I had no pants on, so I turned around quickly and flipped on the light. I put my pants on and ran into the kitchen. I sure scared my grandma because it was 8 a.m. and I didn't have work until 11. As soon as I got into the kitchen, the phone rang. My grandma could tell something was bothering me, so she rushed my aunt off the phone. I told her everything, and she believed me. Then she started to tease me a bit and say, "Kitty gonna get you," over and over. But she told me she has never seen or felt slippers, but she has heard my dog Flanagan scratching at the door and breathing. He has been dead for about a year. At 9:30, I drove my grandma to my aunt's house. I went in, and my aunt said that it looked like I was sick too. I told her that Slippers had come to visit me, and she thought this was so cool. She told me about all the stories of how her cats had died, came to visit her. She told me that she feels cats come off the bed and purr in her ear, and there is no one there. And she also told me that she was downstairs, and she looked at the steps and saw one of her dead cats sitting there, and another one of her dead cats ran up past it. She told me that she had a cat that would drag stuff around the house and leave it in weird places. After it died, she started finding stuff in weird places, like mitts on the steps and shoes in the living room, just like the cat did when it was alive. Then she asked my grandma to remember about how for a long time, after their dog Sandy died, they could hear his nails tapping up and down the hall floor. Once, they both heard it at the same time. My aunt felt bad for me that my experience was so spooky. She said she has never been able to move. She said that poor old Slips must have felt really bad that she scared me. She also said that I must have scared the cat, and that it was too bad that we couldn't have comforted each other like she does with her cats. I went to work and told my friends. They all believed me. 2 of them started telling me super weird stuff that happened to them. One girl never told anyone in her life what happened to her because she was scared that no one would believe her. She decided to tell me because it was obvious I would understand. I will have to get them to write to you. One girl even has a book about everything that happened to her. Thanks so much for reading this. I know you will understand. Writing to you was the first thing I thought of when it happened. Maybe reading your stories heightened my sense of awareness or something. It did not heighten my imagination. Thanks again. I live in London, Ontario, Canada. I moved into a complex near the beginning of September with a very tiny history altogether. The complex itself is fairly new, and as far as I've been able to find out, only has had 1 death, and the house it happened in has no report of any mysterious incidents. With my stay at Unit 40, I've experienced a couple of things that seem quite odd, and I'm not alone. My mom has experienced a few things as well. All that has seemed to happen seemed to be directed towards the entire family, where in contrast to your story, the spirits seem to be focused on you. The things that have happened have not been harmful or even seemingly of evil intentions. If there is a spirit at all, it seems to only want to be recognized as being there. I picked up the feeling of someone being out of place, first I think. It all started with the basement door. Someone will close it tightly and go upstairs or to another part of the house. But whenever someone returned to the door, it would be open only 1.5 inches every time. At the top of the stairs, on the upper floor of the house, there is some sort of a wall that is only about 4 feet in height. Whenever standing there, I would get the odd feeling as if I was standing in someone else's place. Sometimes to the point of feeling nauseous or overwhelmed with an intense throbbing in my muscles. When informing my mom that I felt someone or something was also with us, she sort of shrugged it off. But it wasn't until she told me that the reason for the door opening was that people weren't closing it tightly, that the door opening stopped completely. After that, things that weren't so easily put off started happening. One night, I went downstairs to do the laundry. By our washer and dryer, we have two sinks. One, the closet to the washer, is always filthy. The one next to it is spotless. And out of habit, I took a glance into the sink to make sure nothing was there. And of course, nothing was. Well, before I could even finish putting the laundry on, my dad came to the door. My mom and dad are not divorced, just separated. He stayed for no longer than 30 minutes, seeing as though the other member of the family besides my mother and I, my brother, 10 years old, 11 in March, was not there. When he left, I went back down to finish the laundry. Taking another glance in the sink, I saw, which quite frankly terrified me, a tiny footprint pressed into the dirt. Seeing as no one beside me had been in the basement in the brief 30 minutes I was away, I got quite scared. Trying to think of all the things logically, I kept coming to the question, why? It was most definitely a footprint, slightly smaller than my brother's. The footprint is still in the sink. We're keeping it until we can take a photograph of it. And even if a little kid did it, and I just didn't notice it before, with the bad lighting and all, why the sink? There are no windows in the basement, and the only way to get to the basement is through the house. And with 250-pound Roddies, not too many little kids are happy about going through our house. Another thing that bothered me was that it was only 1 foot. If a little kid did it, how did it get into the sink in the first place? The edge of the sink comes up to my little brother's neck. Another happening was my mom experienced something. She was upstairs sleeping, and I was sleeping on the futon in the living room. The next morning, my mom came downstairs and complained about not being able to sleep last night due to the fire alarm repeatedly going off. She said it happened twice. The first time she stayed in the bed. The second, she went downstairs to investigate, and nothing happened. The latest thing happening was involving my mother as well. I was down in the living room once again, and she was upstairs half asleep. She informed me the following day that the night had been too stressful to her due to hearing what she thought was me going up and down the stairs all night. She told me she was about to call out to me, seeing as if I was coming to bed, when she heard me stop outside her door, which was only open slightly, and act as if I was trying to hear what was going on in the bedroom. I sleep in the living room because I cannot fall asleep in my mother's room. I don't sleep in my room because the cats have it taken over. Whenever I'm in my mom's room, I hear scratching on the wall. Well, more like fingernail tapping and creaking. It's so bad and so realistic, I fear turning my head towards the sound, thinking I'll see someone standing there. With all that has happened and all the pets I own, 2 dogs, 2 cats, 1 rat, 1 parrot and fish, the only one that has responded to anything was my 1 cat Spooky, who is black and about 6 or so years old. Whenever Spooky is out and about the living room area, she becomes quite agitated. Her emotions are if there is a fly or bug pestering her. The way her back jumps and hair stands on the certain parts of her body is interesting. She growls and hisses, then jumps away from the area. Then she seems to act fine. I'm not sure if there's more to what is happening that I'm not seeing, or if I'm seeing too much into everyday things. However, whenever I put off our experiences, my mind drifts back to the footprint in the sink. My mom and I get the feeling that the spirit, if one, is one of a young girl about the age of 12 or 13. When asking someone that has had a few ghostly experiences of their own, an older woman, she says nobody has had anything happen to them in Unit 40, but one time, one of the previous owners took a picture of a porcelain doll on a couch, and in the photo, the doll was glowing. The most unusual thing about this, though, is that it was like brighter than the flash itself, to the point that the doll was just a blur. But the woman said that the people were just weird themselves, and not to worry about anything. My cousin, Brian, and I were extremely close for as long as I can remember. He was about 12 years older than I am. He would go camping with my family a couple times a year and play Santa for me during Christmas. I have a lot of great memories with him. In October of '92, Brian died of a drug overdose. My family suspected that he had been using drugs because he wasn't as involved with family like he had been, stopped going camping and spending Christmas with us so he could play Santa. He was very into boxing and was pretty popular among people in Scranton, Pennsylvania. When he died, I took it the worst. I was in 5th grade and had to get counseling from officials at school because I cried all day, and I even mentioned to people that I wanted to be with him. So my family thought I was thinking about suicide. At Brian's funeral, I never went up to his coffin. I couldn't face the fact that he was lying there dead. He loved pulling pranks, and I remember throughout the whole wake, wishing he would jump up and say it was all a joke. For a while, I felt guilty of his death because I thought that if I knew him about using drugs, I would be able to talk to him and he would have ended his addiction because of me. After suspecting his drug use for a while, my family found out it was true, but they kept it from me because I looked to him as my role model and they didn't want me to hate him. My cousin Chip, Brian's older brother, got married in '97 and I was a bridesmaid. In the church, there was one section of the pews that was blocked off so the photographer had easy access for taking pictures. In the middle of the ceremony, I saw Brian sit down in the section that was blocked off for the photographer. I couldn't believe I was seeing him because, well, he was dead and had been for a while now. I kept looking at my mother to see if she noticed him, but it was obvious that she didn't from the looks of concern on her face towards me. All I did was look at Brian and look at my mom, and tears would stream down my face. My mom kept mouthing to me, "What's wrong?" Brian stayed for most of the ceremony, and when it was almost over, he looked at me, smiled, and left. After ceremony was over, and the bridal party had ended, I ran out of the church, hysterical crying, but I did so that no one noticed. I'm sure people assumed I was crying because of the joyous occasion, not because they saw a ghost. My mom met me outside and asked me what was wrong. I told her Brian was there, and she didn't believe me. She asked me what he was wearing, thinking I was lying. I couldn't come up with just anything. I told her what he wore from head to toe. She didn't believe me until she realized the suit I described to her was what he wore in his coffin the day he was buried. I believe wholeheartedly that he was there, and he only let me see him because he knew I wasn't over his death, and he wanted me to be okay. It was his way of showing me that he was okay, and I didn't have to worry about him. To me, it was his way of showing us that he still thought about our family, and that no matter what, he would be there for all of us on our special days. I always had a hard time thinking about him, so he was brought up on holidays, or even when my family was together. It was in those critical moments I had to leave the room if I didn't want to burst into tears. I've had a lot of closure since seeing him. I'm now able to talk to people about him, and even go to his gravesite without breaking down. Now that I'm in college, I chose a profession where I'm able to work with people with addictions and that need counseling, hoping that I could save other people from experiencing the pain I went through. An online friend of mine sent me your site when I told her about the experiences in the home I now live in. I find it so interesting, the work you are doing. I'm always afraid that people will think I'm crazy. I'm 47 years old and live in a home that was built in 1955. So many unusual things happen in the home. Whistling in one bedroom, a strong smell of perfume, and a white shoulder, even in my guest bedroom. The constant thinking someone's coming down the hall, day and night. The whistling is always early in the morning. The most eerie, unusual experience I had was when I was playing the piano. The hymn, Amazing Grace. It was as if someone had opened the back door and was standing in my living room beside me. Even the dog refused to go to the back hall and in the room, something she had never done before. Late, I told the daughter-in-law about the experience. She said that was the doctor's favorite tunes. I also asked her if he whistled a lot. She said, every morning. The house was lived in by he, his first wife, his second wife, and his sister. He died in the master bedroom. The first wife died in the middle bedroom, and the sister-in-law died in my now computer room. Her scent, of course, white shoulders. I moved to this town. The house been on the market for 4 years because of its reputation. Nothing bad happened. In fact, it is rather comforting sometimes, but at times unexpected. The really only bad thing that happened was that one of my Civil War plates, collector's plates, came crashing down while the others were still fine. I guess the doctor really can't stand liking General Grant. Anyway, thanks for letting me share my story. I've long avoided writing to someone about this experience. Reason being is I'm a skeptic and don't want to rush to judgment. To this very day, we have no idea what caused the ruckus, so anything is possible, I guess. The experience actually happened to my mother, not me. I tried to recall it to the best of my memory from what she told me. This happened over a year ago, May of 1999. We had moved into a brand new house. No one else had ever lived in it, and it was a newly developed area a month before. One morning, I got up as the norm, getting ready for work, and waiting for my mom to finish. All of a sudden, very unlike her, she poked her head out really quick and asked if anything fell or broke in my room. I told her that everything seemed fine, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, all of a sudden she blurts out that we must have a ghost then. I must have gotten pale. Reason being is since moving into our home, I've gotten back into looking up info on the supernatural. That's how I even came across this site. In fact, the night of the incident, I'd been reading stories, looking at photos, etc. It just felt like a really weird coincidence. Anyway, I asked her what had happened. Apparently, the night before, she had her back to her doorway, reading a book in bed, trying to fall asleep. I was already fast asleep in my room, with the door closed, when all of a sudden, she heard a massive crash. I'm an extremely sound sleeper, so I never heard it. She jumped out of bed, thinking her cat had knocked down a plant or something. He was constantly getting into things. When she came out, she looked all over, and couldn't find anything wrong. Since the weather was nice, I knew she had her window open, and asked if maybe it came from outside. She said she had thought of that, but the noise came distinctly from inside the house. She said it didn't sound like it came from the way of the window. We also didn't have anything outside that would have caused the noise. Our garage is full of all sorts of stuff she brought back after father passed on. Grandma was gone a year before him. I thought maybe something crashed in there, which to be honest, would surprise me. We had stuff packed in there as well. She said maybe so, though she was still doubtful on it. But still, the noise was extremely loud, and she remembers that, to this day. Since then, we've been in the garage milling around, and never have come across anything down or destroyed. We never have figured out the source of the noise. We've never had any other experience happen since. I'm still very skeptical as to what happened. I'm going to tell you about a ghost that I'm pretty sure is haunting me. Her name is Nellie Ellen. I've never actually seen Nellie Ellen, but I can really feel her presence. It started when I was about 5 years old. I had one of my friends over, and we were sleeping in a tent under the skylights. My friend woke up at about 2 a.m. in the morning and said she wanted to go home. She was sweating profusely and was very pale. I got scared, and I asked what was the matter. She didn't want to tell me, but I finally dragged it out of her. She said that she'd seen an old lady looking at us through the top of the tent, through the skylights, and she was bloody, holding a broken teacup. We ran to my mom and slept in her bedroom that night. I never saw her though, but my friend really scared me. Over the next 5 years, only small stuff happened. Footsteps down the hall, knocking, etc. When I was 10, I had one of my very good friends over. She woke me up around 2, like my other friend had, and she was crying. The room was so dark, so I turned on the lights. My friend had a bloody nose and was crying really hard now. I asked what happened, and she insisted that she got them all the time, and we called her mother. Her mother came, and we were talking about how my friend was really upset. I said that she told me that she got nosebleeds all the time. Her mother said that it was odd that she lied, because she never gets nosebleeds. When I went to school, I asked her what really happened, and she said, Nellie Ellen, and we've never been friends since. Years later, odd things began to happen again. I was up late, watching TV, and I heard knocking coming from my window. Nothing was there though, that I could see anyway. The next day, I did some research on my house. I found out that there used to be a woman named Nellie Ellen who owned a tea shop in the bottom of the house. I asked a neighbor about her. My neighbor said that she used to be friends with Nellie Ellen until she went crazy. I was informed that Nellie Ellen would sit on the roof in the late hours of the night with her teacups and talk to herself. One night though, Nellie Ellen accidentally locked herself out of her house and was stuck on the roof in the blistering cold. She tried to get in, but she couldn't, so she had to break a window to get in. But some of the window hit her, and she was so weak from breaking the window in the cold, she was left to die on the roof with the thing she loved the most, her teacups. A few weeks had gone by, and nothing had happened. But one day, my dogs got up and started barking at nothing. They are very protective. They usually can't get up the stairs, but somehow managed to and started barking at the roof. I was sure it was Nellie Ellen. I asked her what she wanted, and the dogs stopped barking. They just stared at the window in the attic. She didn't say anything, so I told her to leave me alone and never come back. I think my wish was granted though, because I didn't see her again. The Yellow House on Elm Street in Kansas was home to a restless spirit that had died from illness in the bedroom upstairs. I, as a young girl in high school, chose this room as my own. It was soon after moving in that I heard scuffling noises as if he was walking around, wondering what I was doing there. One night, in fact, I awoke to find him lying next to me. It was like millions of gray dots forming a human shape. At the time, I thought it was my imagination and blew it off. Then he became more active. I could hear a slamming of the back door and someone running up the steps, and then you could not hear anything else after a big stomp at the top of the stairs. One night in particular, I heard a stomp outside my bedroom and then a scuffling of someone walking slowly. It came to the right side of my bed and stopped, then to the left side and stopped. Then it went to the end of my bed and stopped. At the same time, my heavy curtain flew out over my bed, straight as an arrow. Needless to say, I was scared out of my wits. I knew I had to do some research and find out what needed to be done to lead him to the other side. I went to the library and read up on everything I could. I asked around town and found out his name and that he had died in my room. I then decided to talk to him. I said, "Maynard, you need to go to the other side now. Your work here is done." I cannot remember how much time lapsed, but one night I heard another thump in the hall outside my room. But this time, an elderly lady was leading an elderly man from the hall into my closet. I watched them without any fear at all. It was such a peaceful thing to witness. Someone came to lead Maynard home. I'm now 47 and still remember this so well. My father lives in the same house, and I do not feel any presence there now. I will add a PS. When I first moved there, a man's wedding ring fell from the top of a door and rolled across the floor to me. At the time, I was a romantic and said, "I will marry the man who fits this ring." I still have this ring, and since it is so large, no man has ever been able to wear it. Several years ago, sometime in 1984, I was living in a small town outside of Fort Worth, Texas, by the name of Crowley. At the time, I was in my early 20s, and I had a roommate. His name was Mike. Anyway, one night, Mike and I were sitting around, watching TV, and having a couple of beers. As it got late, and we were getting tired, the strangest thing happened. In the bathroom in the hallway, just a few feet away, we heard what sounded like the toilet flushing. Mike looked at me kind of puzzled, and asked me if I heard it too. I kind of laughed, and said no. As I switched the light on, I felt my hair stand up. The water in the toilet was still going around. Since we lived in a trailer house, we both just blew it off as poor construction. We continued to sit and have a few more beers when Mike looked at me and said, "Do you smell that?" I sniffed a little. and said it smelled like gas. Since the stove in the kitchen directly behind us was the only gas in the house, I immediately stood and turned to look. What I saw absolutely scared the hell out of me. All 4 burners in the stove are on. I finally got up the nerve to turn them off, and we had no problems that night. But that's not the end of the story. Several days later, Mike called me at work. It was around 11 p.m. He asked me if I could come home right now. I could hear the fear in his voice and asked him what was wrong. He said he was lying on the couch when he heard what sounded like kitchen cabinets being slammed closed, and he was very scared. I went home as quickly as possible and found Mike outside waiting, afraid to go into the house. We quietly went inside and found nothing out of the ordinary. I know that this sounds very strange and would be easy to make up. The few people I've had told this to just don't believe it, but I was there and it did happen. The only problem is that for all these years, I've wondered what happened. Was it something paranormal or just ordinary things that go bump in the night? I guess we'll never know for sure. This is not as complex or as interesting as other stories, but very real nevertheless. I was working as a janitor in a restaurant in the Sacramento, California area in the 1980s. During this time, I'd bought some books on ghosts and hauntings, to include one book called Poltergeist, which gave detailed accounts of numerous poltergeist cases. It was with this book that I had left laying about the house, and then one of my older brothers noticed. He pulled me aside to warn me that I should be careful with what I was messing around with, because, in his words, messing around like this is like knocking on the gates to hell. In light of the fact that he experienced, ironically, while also working as a janitor, a very disturbing encounter of his own, I took this warning seriously. So one night at work, shortly after my brother's words had gotten the best of me, and I had put the book aside, I was busy cleaning the dining room carpet. The place was closed, and the only ones in the building were 2 other janitors and myself. Picture a Denny's-like place, with the cook's line adjacent to the dining room, a larger kitchen and back, and an upstairs with a storage room, an office, and employee restrooms. I had completed about 2/3 of the carpet, utilizing a big, rotary-style, industrial buffer. It was 4 a.m., and I'd parked the buffer and the cleaning items with it in the middle of the non-smoking area, away from any tables. I turned and headed for the cook's line, where one of my coworkers was busy cleaning. We exchanged words, commenting that it was time to take a break and make something to eat. He was looking at me as I approached the sandwich side of the cook's line. Then, about 15 seconds after I'd left the buffer, there came the loudest bangs that I've ever heard, indoors. 3 heavy raps, bang, bang, bang. It sounded exactly like a giant fist had pounded down on one of the dining room tables. It hit the table so hard that I could hear the silverware rattle. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I spun immediately around as the sounds came from where I just left, the buffer in the non-smoking area. I saw nothing and spun around back to around my coworker. "What was that?" I asked. "I don't know," was his answer. I thought that was strange, since he was looking in the exact same direction of the noise. To this day, he maintains that he's seen nothing. I immediately went over to see if the buffer had gone off on its own and banged into one of the tables. To my amazement, the buffer was as I left it. I expected to see one of the tables. These are your heavy, wooden tables, tipped on its side. All the tables in the section were okay. No silverware was disturbed. We immediately searched the building, armed with knives and cooking utensils, for the elusive visitor. No one was to be found. We tried, but could not even come close to duplicating what the 2 of us agreed was a banging on one of the tables. We could barely get the silverware to rattle. This was way beyond what any person could accomplish and get away with without either of us seeing him. I would say that if we took one of these tables and dropped it from the roof onto the parking lot, it would still not be loud enough. Sorry, I cannot say that I smelled something, saw shadows, or heard voices. I ditched the books after that, all except for the one called Poltergeist. Thanks for reading. I live in Hawaii, and there are many different types of ghosts here. We even have our own tour of the most haunted places on the island, where I live, Oahu. Every year, my family camps down at the beach for the Labor Day weekend. In 1992, my boyfriend and a close friend of my cousin's joined us for the weekend. The place we camped had a lot of ghost stories. The beach and all around it was said to be haunted. It did not help when that year, a person was found murdered only a short distance from where we were camping. My boyfriend and our close friend had to work and were coming down to the campsite one night. My cousin and I were on the beach relaxing, waiting for them to return. When they got back, we made a fire and sat around talking. All of a sudden, we got onto the subject of ghosts, and my boyfriend started to tell us of what him and Robbie saw while they were coming back. Robbie did not want to admit what he saw, and while they were arguing, my cousin, who was sitting behind us, started to freak out. All of us thinking that something horrible had happened, turned all of our attention to her. She said that she saw a guy floating on the water, and he told her that she should be very afraid. After we had calmed her down, my two cousins and I had to go to the bathroom. Upon returning from the bathroom, we were all talking and did not notice our shadows. I was in the middle of my two cousins. Our shadows had a slight outline because our backs were facing the light. My cousin stopped all of a sudden, and we looked down at our shadows. Next to my cousin stood a shadow of a man. This shadow was lighter than ours and did not have an outline. Nobody was by the bathrooms except for us. I tried not to panic, but both of my cousins ran and left me there for a brief second by myself, and then I started to run. All of us grabbed onto each other, and we did not stop until we met up with the guys and told them what happened. That same ghost haunted us for about a year. Sometimes, still to this day, he will come back on the same night when we first met him. Back in 1985, my family moved to a large house in Whibley, in Washington. I was 17 when we moved into this place, and from day one, it just gave me the creeps. The constant feeling of being watched was unnerving. Within the first 2 weeks of moving in, I had my first real experience. We had finally gotten our furniture and was very thrilled to get my bedroom unpacked. That night, I lay in my bed, very smug in my cozy room. The house was dark, and my two younger brothers, little sister, and parents were asleep. I began to feel very cold and nervous. I lay there, wondering why I was feeling so odd. Suddenly, there was this horrible screaming coming from the hallway. I jumped out of my bed, grabbed my baseball bat, and ran out of my room. I ran down the hallway towards my little brother's room, convinced that someone had broken in and was attacking them. I ran into their room to find them sound asleep and safe. I checked my sister's room and my parents. All were sleeping and fine. I went back to bed, thinking I must have imagined it. It happened again 3 more times. Finally, I woke my dad and told him what was happening. He thought I was nuts. Nothing else happened that night. Of course, sometime later that year, I began to hear scratching sounds. The sounds mostly came from outside my bedroom windows. It sounded like someone was taking a rake, running it along the sliding, right under my windows. I had 3 windows in my room. 1 faced the south, and 2 faced the west. My best friend and I would stand in front of my windows, looking down, trying to figure out who or what was causing this sound. We could actually hear it move from one side of the house to the other, but could see nothing. When this sound would happen, I would say it's just Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. Other interesting things would happen, not so scary, but weird all the same. In the wee hours of the morning, say around 2 or 3, you could hear the kitchen cabinets opening and shutting, as if someone was looking for a glass. When you near the kitchen, the sound would stop. I've heard this, along with my best friend, her boyfriend, and my siblings. When I would be standing in the front yard with my friends, you could see the living room curtains open slightly, as if someone was peeking out. This would happen even when none of my other family members were home, so I know it wasn't them spying on me. My friends would point it out to me. Who's watching us? There was a spare bedroom in the finished basement that would cause a strange sensation. You would stand in it and become disoriented. You couldn't figure out what wall was west, south, east, or north. You know how you can stand in, say, your living room and say, this wall is east and behind it is the kitchen. In this room, you couldn't pinpoint any landmarks behind the walls, and you would become dizzy. I had a friend. He was in the army and very macho. Stay in that room one night because he didn't believe me. In the middle of the night he left. He said it freaked him out. To this day, we still talk about it. Items would disappear and reappear somewhere else odd. Music from a music box could be heard in the afternoons. When I came home from school and I was the only one home, the kicker was, we didn't have any music box. You could hear someone walking up and down the stairs, only when I was home alone. Nice, huh? When I would talk to my parents about it, they refused to say anything other than, don't say anything to your brothers or sister. I spoke to my youngest brother 6 months ago. He's now 20, and he informed me that he was aware of the hauntings and had many a scary story of his own. The same with my other brothers and sisters. Although it had been over 11 years since we moved out, we still think about this house, and I wonder if the current owners are having a problem with Freddy. I've lived in this house for 15 years, and nothing out of the ordinary ever happened, till I put a chalkboard in the kitchen for messages from my husband and children. About a day after I hung the board, my favorite aunt passed away. She has Alzheimer's. On the board, the word Y began to appear. I began to question my family about the messages. No one knew anything about it. One night, my husband had enough and questioned everyone about the message and became angry that no one knew anything about it. He yelled at the board, "Why? What?" I was thinking dinner that evening, and my youngest daughter was taking a bath, and she yelled for me. I left the kitchen, and the board was empty. When I returned to the kitchen, the chalkboard was covered with the word Y again. Suddenly, I felt the presence of a woman. It was my aunt who was with me. I told her that she had died, and it was time she rested after having a hard struggle with her sickness. I erased the board before anyone could see it again and took it down. Nothing ever happened again. I feel my aunt didn't understand what had happened to her and had come to me for answers. Why? That was the magic word for her. To this day, I still don't know why, and I don't think I'll ever know why. All I know is, Alzheimer's is a horrible disease, and once you have it, there's no coming back from it. Alright, honestly guys, I gotta be honest with you 100%. When you were here before, you guys couldn't look me in the eye. You're just like an angel. Honestly, your guys' skin makes me cry. You float like a feather in a beautiful world, and honestly, I just wish I was special. And you guys, you're so freaking special. But because I'm a ghost, I'm a phantom, I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo. Someone commented on my channel and they hated my voice and they were like, what the hell are you doing here? And I was like, I don't belong here. I don't care if it hurts, guys. I don't care if these trolls want to have control. You know, I want a perfect body. I want a perfect soul. But you can't get that during narration. Okay. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Anyway, that's, parody of creep, I guess. Anyway, hope you guys like this compilation. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to keep this short because this is a huge file. My computer really hates this, so hope you guys enjoyed the compilation. I know it's a compilation and everything, but a lot of you guys seem to enjoy it. And I'm going to cut it out right now. And